I am Audrey, the Partner Development Analyst here at Inflectra, and today I'm happy to introduce co-hosts Adam Sandman and Evan Sanders. Adam is the CEO and founder of Inflectra, and Evan is the Engagement Manager at Critical Logic. This webinar today is going to be focused on how to generate tests and scripts for SpiraTest and Rapise using IQM Studio. Without further ado, I'll hand over the mic to Evan.
Okay, thanks for that, Audrey. And yeah, thanks to Inflectra for co-hosting this webinar with Critical Logic. So as Audrey mentioned, we've got a couple things on the agenda for this session. I want to start actually in Spira, looking at the requirements artifacts there, and then just kind of describe where we're going to go from there. So let me pull that up. Oops, sorry guys. So those of you who are familiar with Spira, you've probably seen a view like this before. This is the requirements artifact, as I mentioned, and we're looking at the sample application that comes with your instance of Spira. This is the library information system section. And what we want to do in the session today is really show how we can go soup to nuts with IQM Studio and SpiraTest both. So what that'll look like is we'll start by looking at these requirements and realize that we want to test these requirements. We want to develop a robust set of tests to validate these requirements, which we're going to do in IQM Studio. So we're going to visualize these requirements in Studio, and then we're going to invoke our test generation algorithm, which is going to automatically generate the optimized set of tests that we need to validate these requirements. And then we'll switch back to Spira. We'll look at some coverage and some different views, some useful reports that Spira will develop. And then from there, we'll go into the automation side and show how we can actually develop automation scripts that will actually end up running in real time. So again, these are the requirements we're looking at. We're going to focus on this book management feature. So just in broad terms, it looks like the system, we want to be able to add books to a library information system, edit them, delete them, maybe do some different things associating data to them. And we're going to visualize this in IQM Studio. So I'm going to jump into our studio now and pull up. This is our blank workspace. So if we think about one of the first things we would do, looking at just this first requirement here, add new books to the system. So we want to be able to visualize that, and I'll just give a brief introduction to what we call our node editor here. I'm not going to get into too much detail here. But the first thing I might want to do, for example, is verify new book added. So I can just simply say that, and then this becomes part of my model. And then I'll realize before I can do anything with that, before I can actually verify the book is added, I need to take a step to actually add that book. And it turns out I would have to take a couple different steps to get there. I'd have to navigate to my library information system, maybe put in some credentials, navigate to the right area once I'm logged in, and then I can actually go down the path of verifying the book. So for the sake of this demo, I've gone ahead and done that already. And we would end up with something that looks kind of like this. This would be sort of our MVP view of this diagram. And by the way, this is a Boolean logic diagram. So you'll see we've got operators like and in here. We can also do ors and nots, things that you can do with Boolean logic. And you'll notice these steps I have here on the left side. These are the steps that we're always going to have to take when we think about this system and developing tests for the system. We're going to have to do all of these things every time. One of the cool things about IQM Studio is you define this once, and then when we generate tests, it's going to reuse those steps every single time. We don't have to copy paste or anything like that. It's just automatically going to use the steps that we've put in here. And then we get to a point where we realize, okay, if we want to truly test that requirement, we've got the happy path side, verify the book is added, but we're also going to have an error condition where we leave, the field blank and we expect an error. So that's pretty common, right? Like it takes, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio of tests to requirements. You're going to have some instances where it'll take you a few tests to validate one requirement, for example. So now that I've recognized that and I've started to represent my requirements in here, I'm going to pull up yet another version of this diagram. So that first version we were looking at, or the previous version, this would be somebody like a BA could create this example, right? And use that to augment the requirements. Then they could hand it off to QA, for example, and end up with something that looks a bit more like this. And I'm going to turn off these constraints just to give a little cleaner look here. But you'll see I still have a lot of those same steps. I just reuse these, but now I've got it split into my 3 different paths. I'm going to create a new book, edit a book, or delete an existing book. And then I've got my verifications both on the happy path and the error side. So now that I've gotten this far, I want to actually prove that I'm testing those requirements at certain points in my diagram. And I can do that by, I'm going to launch a feature now we call STAR. STAR is synchronized tests and requirements. And what we're going to see here is on the left, this is IQM Studio. So these are the different models that I have in IQM Studio. And on the right is our connection panel. So I'm going to go ahead and connect to SpiraTest. And I've connected to that library information system product that we were looking at. It's going to default to the test case view. I'm actually going to flip over to the requirements view though, and we're going to see those same requirements organized in that tree structure that we did in Spira. So under that book management epic, we've got these features here. Now what I want to do is pull these down into IQM Studio and then map them to my requirements, or excuse me, to my nodes in the model here. So I'm going to select the requirements that I want to pull in, and then I'm going to use our add feature. I'll create a new folder. I'll call it book management. Whoops. And create it. And now I'm just going to add these requirements, and this will take just a second. And what this is doing is pulling those 7 requirements down into IQM Studio. So now if I look, I'll see I've got a requirement, or those same 7 requirements that are in Spira, those are now in IQM Studio. So again, I didn't have to copy paste. I used our sync feature. And now what I'm able to do, declutter a little. So verified book added, for example. If I look at my requirements tab here, that's this first requirement here, 108, add new books to the system. So I can just double click on it, and it's going to add or link this requirement to this step in my model. And if I do that with the rest of these requirements, so again here, I would add this requirement 108 to both the happy path and the error side. When I look at updating a book though, I'm going to do more than one requirement here. So I want to edit the book, but I also want to I want to specifically say what I want to edit. So I want to say different subject, different author, and different editions. So I can add those requirements, all 3 of those requirements to that node. And I'll just finish these off real quick, just so we can see what this looks like. And we'll just say delete. And I think I picked the wrong requirement in that last case, but that's okay. For the sake of this example, it's okay. So that's all it takes. Now I've got my requirements mapped to my different verification steps in the node, and now I'm ready to generate my tests. And that's just a couple of clicks of a button. This generate screen is going to give me the option to invoke our test generation algorithm. And we'll see in just a couple of seconds, IQM Studio identified 124 variations, and it's testing all of those in just 6 tests. So that's great. Now we've got our tests, but we want to be able to do something useful with them, something exciting. That's where STAR comes in again. I'm going to open STAR and get back into our project. This time I'm going to stay at the test case view. And I'll see now on IQM Studio side, these are the 6 tests that I just created. And I can select this entire folder. Basically, I want to push all 6 of these tests up to Spira. And I'll create a new folder just so we can keep them organized here. I'll call this model generated. Create. And then add these tests. So this will take, again, just 10 or 15 seconds. And what's happening right now is we're reaching out using the Inflectra REST API. This is going to build our 6 test cases and populate them with the steps that we put in the model. And because we mapped our requirements to our verification nodes, it's actually going to show the test coverage at the same time. It's all happening all in one step. And we'll see once this finishes, we'll flip back over to the Spira side and see what that looks like. And then I'll hand it over to Adam as the Spira expert here. But here we see we've got our 6 tests. And with a little preview pane down here, we can verify that, this test in IQM Studio is the same test in Spira. And now again, we'll flip over and I'll just go ahead and refresh this. And if we jump into one of these requirements now then, and we go to our test coverage tab, here we'll see we're proving our requirements coverage here. So Adam, do you want to take it over?
Sure. Thanks, Evan. That's great, and I appreciate the background on Spira requirement side. So one of the things that Spira really provides from a requirements and test management standpoint is the fact that it lets you have, first of all, different views of the information. So if you can just, before we go into the coverage and traceability, when we first came in, we saw this view that we're in, which is the tree view. This, as Evan mentioned, you have many different roles on a project. Often you have BAs, QAs, developers. This view that you're seeing here is really the QA view. It shows you all the requirements in a tree structure, and will show you columns like the test coverage, the task progress, there's the priority, and you can of course filter on this page. So I guess for a second, if you want to filter on test coverage, using the filter to the right, yeah, that one, and say not covered, that would find you any of the requirements, if there are any, that IQM has not yet covered. So that way, obviously we did it for one branch of the requirements, but obviously that was just the first piece of work. You would repeat the same work that Evan just showed you across the other different parts of the system, managing authors, managing subjects, managing administration. And as you do that with IQM Studio, eventually over time, you get to the point where the not covered filter returns you back no data. So at that point, you really have full coverage of all the requirements. And you might, of course, want to filter by release, so that way things that are further out don't necessarily need to be covered right now. And on the left-hand side, there's the charts where you can see, if you that donut chart, that's going to show you the percentage coverage you have right now. Where you see gray, that means they're not run, but there is coverage. Blue shows that there is no coverage. So you'd want to get that 20 number down to a much lower number, in a real project, about 54% not covered. So that's a key. So the inline graphs in Spira make it really easy to see how much work you've done to date and how much work is left, along with the burn down chart that's directly below it. So just for right now, click on clear filters so we can get ready for the later stages of your demo. That's going to bring it back to the previous view. And when Evan starts to show the execution of the test cases, we'll see some of those gray bars in the test coverage column switch to other colors as things pass or fail. But as I mentioned, this is the QA view of Spira, really focused on the QA analyst test manager. On the top bar, you'll see that those other views, and I should mention for those at home, if you're using SpiraTest, you won't have these options. This is only available in the Spira team and Spira plan editions. So if you don't see them, that's the reason. But there are some different views. This is the hierarchical view. If you click on the bulleted list, this gives you a flat view. And the benefit of the flat view is it lets you sort the arrangement, and you're not necessarily constrained by the hierarchy. So if you wanted to sort by priority on this view, you could do that, which you can't do on the other view. And then the next view over is our Scrum and Kanban board Agile view, and that lets you see the items that we've seen already. You can see here are some of the requirements. You can see we've got test cases underneath them. This is an Agile board view of the exact same information. And as you can see, Evan is moving the mouse over some of the requirements. That's the main story card, and then there's 2 or 3 mini cards under each of them. Those are the test cases, and when the tests pass or fail, the little mini line will change color from gray to green or red or orange or yellow, depending on what happens. So again, if you're working on an agile project, this is a great view to share with the team on a stand-up meeting or a sprint planning meeting or a release backlog planning meeting. Obviously, BAs are an important community that we have. If you click on the paragraph icon, this is a relatively new view we added earlier this year, where you can actually see all of your requirements in a document form, and you can click on the items in the left-hand navigation, and that will let you, navigate to different sections of this requirements document. So that's pretty nice. And that way, if the requirements have text and bullets or flows, you can see all of them written out in full versus not having to click on each one. If you have permissions, you can also edit them on this view. So if you click on the little square with the on the right-hand side, yeah, one of those, that's going to show you how to edit, and then click on the text underneath. And hopefully, if that's in the right status, there it is, an inline editor is available. So those who are transitioning teams from requirements documents, this is a very natural view for you to work in, and it gives the BAs a view that really is very similar to what they would have in other tools or documents that they're familiar with. But just to reiterate, this is the exact same information that we see on the boards. It's the exact information we saw in that tree view at the beginning. They're just different views of the same information. So different teams and different roles can use the different views to interact simultaneously with the data, but ultimately it's all stored in one place, which is then becomes a source of truth for IQM Studio. And the last view I'll mention is the mind map view. That lets you see the requirements drawn out in a tree view diagram with the associations. So this is showing you the relationships between the different requirements. And it's in some ways a similar kind of visualization to IQM Studio, except they're working at a much more detailed level within the model. This is at a higher level, just showing the relationships between requirements, not at the model level. And then if you can click back on the first view, just to get us back to our starting point. A few other things to mention. If you click on one of the requirements, for example, adding new books to the system, throughout Spira, we have some key features for requirements management and task management. One is first of all, the test coverage. You can see that right here. You can add and remove test cases manually or using IQM Studio. These could be manual test cases that are going to be executed by a human. They could be exploratory tests. We also do support linking to automation tests. In other webinars, we can show we've got some that will show you different automation tools you can integrate with. So please look out for those webinars. But we do integrate with various different open source and commercial tools for actually running tests. In addition, we'll also be showing you today how you can use Rapise to do automated testing using the Rapise automation tool with IQM Studio. If we go back to the overview tab, a few other things that I think are worth mentioning. One is the fact that we have the rich text editor right underneath with the description. You can also customize these requirements with different text blocks. For example, the notes field here, you could add an acceptance criteria or a stakeholders. So if your company is used to having a requirements document with different sections, you can basically build that out directly in Spira, creating a virtual requirements template with different rich text sections that people fill in. So you could have separate preconditions and post-conditions from the main description. And there's also comment tracking below. If we go back up to the top, you'll notice also if you click on the operations button, there's a workflow built into the system. We haven't got time today to go through that in too much detail, but requirements can be managed directly within Spira. You can have reviews, sign-offs. We do support electronic signatures. So if you are working in a regulated industry like medical devices, pharmaceuticals, banking, automotive systems, or aerospace, you can actually do signatures and sign-offs directly in Spira. And then the other thing to mention would be if you go in the associations tab, we do have traceability from this requirement to other requirements and also other defects. And if you were to connect Spira up to a source code management tool, either using our own Teravault source code tool or a third party like GitHub or GitLab, you can actually tie revisions to the requirements. So, for example, if someone changes some code, you want to know why did we change the code, it would have traceability back to the requirement. And then as well as traceability, another really important feature is auditability. If you click on the history tab, we do support multiple types of auditability. First of all, we give you the auditability of any changes made. And you can see here that we've made some changes to the name of the requirement, to the fields. That's all been generated. But also the first two rows are very interesting because if you remember, IQM Studio actually added some test cases to the requirement. And you can see in here, because we've turned on the baselining feature within Spira, what we're tracking the association adds or removes. So if someone was to go into test coverage who had permissions to do so and removes a test case, what will actually happen is it will trace that, and in the history you'll see an association remove entry will be added. This is really important because in many cases people will be running tests, passing and failing, and there's always that temptation to remove a failed result, and the system will stop you doing that because it will be in the history log. So you can run an audit report and verify, well, a test case was removed from this requirement, and you can find out why that was. And that there are legitimate reasons because the test case doesn't apply, but there could be other reasons. So the traceability and auditability are really important features that make sure it guarantees the integrity of your requirements and guarantees the integrity of your testing and test coverage. The last thing to mention, if we go into test coverage, is we do have a feature called suspect. If we click on one of these test cases, either one is fine, you'll notice there's a field called the suspect flag. Right now that's not set. If we change one of the requirements, this will get automatically set to suspect, and the test case will then be searchable, and you can find all of the test cases that have a suspect flag set. This is really important because when we go further on down the process, we approve the test case, we approve the requirements. You don't want something going back and changing a requirement in the workflow, and the test case is now out of sync. So the suspect flag gets automatically set whenever a test case changes after it's been approved, because the requirement changed. So if the requirement changes, test case is approved, we're going to flag the test case that there's an impact that needs to be reviewed. It doesn't necessarily mean the test case is out of date, just means that there have been material changes to the requirement that it supports. I think that's the main features of requirements. Anything else, Evan, you'd like to bring out?
No, I think that was a very good overview, Adam.
You're welcome. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Evan, who's going to take us through the next step of IQM Studio.
Yeah, so Adam brought up change, right? That's something that's inevitably going to happen in any project, whether it's a requirement change due to, it's a new sprint, or, the requirement wasn't right in the first place, whatever the case may be. There's going to be change. Hopefully it starts in the requirements and then it can flow into the test cases and, everything from there. So if we go back to a requirement here, and we'll say one of these changed. Let's see if we go back to the overview system. So I'll just change the title here, or maybe, we'll add something to the description. Now changed. It doesn't really matter. All I'm doing is making a change to the requirement. And if we go back to Studio now and bring Star back up. And we go back to our requirements tab here, I'm going to get an indication in Star saying, hey, this requirement has changed. You need to, so now instead of adding the requirement to IQM Studio, we have the sync feature. And this is actually going to just keep those requirements in sync, both on the Spira side and the IQM side. So when a requirement changes, it'll update here. You'll still, the analyst, it's still going to be up to the analyst to go assess the impact of that change and see where that's going to affect, the model. But let's say we did that. Let's say we did that analysis work and we realized that the change to the requirement was something a little bit more interesting than what I just did. Let's say now we have to make sure we can do special characters in the book title. So what that would look like, I would find where I'm entering something in the name field in the model here. So now instead of just entering textbook, I'll say now with special characters. And I'm going to go ahead and copy this because I want to verify this too. I want to enter this in the book name field, and then I'm going to verify that on the verification side. So now what I can do is I'm just going to generate the tests again. And again, this just takes a couple of seconds. And then I'll go back into Star. Do I have Star up still? No. And now it's going to do something similar, except now it's going to say, hey, these tests are more recent than your tests in Spira. So now you need to sync them. So I'm just going to select the entire folder and sync. This usually goes a little bit faster than adding. It's just the way the API works. And we'll see in just whatever that was, 5 or 10 seconds. Now my tests are back in sync. So if I go look at Spira, and if we can find that test, let's see. Model generated. See if I can find which test that is quickly. Back to overview. Yeah, so now we see here step 7, enter test book now with special characters in the name field. So right there, I've updated every test that uses that step by making the change in one place in the diagram and then pushing the change up to Spira using our star feature. And if we did any other change too, if we added a new requirement to that, or we took a requirement away from that test, that would all automatically just flow into Spira. All the things that you care about updating are going to flow up into Spira. If we do something, if we come into here, and let me pause a second and say that IQM Studio generates the tests, but then from there on out, everything else happens in Spira. So if you want to execute these, you execute them in Spira. If you want to update the priority, that's in Spira. We're not going to update any of that. IQM Studio is not going to update that. So from here, then, we've talked about, getting requirements into IQM Studio, generating the test coverage, pushing everything back up into Spira. But we've done so from a manual tester point of view, right? So like if I wanted to execute this test, I would just click the play button and I could go through step by step and run this test manually. One of the other cool things that IQM Studio does, though, is it lets non-technical people like me, I am not a developer, but we use a framework and what we call keywords to allow people like me, QA people who are, either SMEs on the system or just very, very talented testers who aren't necessarily developers. Our framework is going to let those people generate automation scripts, and that's what I want to show now. So if we go back to Studio, I'm going to show how to do that using a process we call scripting. So I'm going to go through a couple examples here, and then I'll flip to a version that's already done, and we'll be able to run these tests. So our first step here, launch the browser. In order to get to our library information system, we have to launch the browser. So I'm going to go to the scripting tab and add a type of keyword that's called start browser. So this series of dropdowns, or this dialog with dropdowns here, this is what I mean when I say scripting, and these are my keywords: the process type, the process, and then the value that I want to pass in here. And I'm actually going to change this to Firefox just for kicks. So you'll see we've got different data types here. A lot of people who are interested in automation ask about, what kind of data we could pass in. Whatever you want, we could pass in here. In this case, it's just a literal string, but we can do variables. We've got a couple external integrations we could do, or if it's like a shared, like a data sheet somewhere, we can do that too. But in this case, I'll just leave it as a literal value. So this keyword is going to start my browser and pass in this URL. So what's happening in the magic side, I'll call it, the part that we don't see right now, is IQM Studio is going to take these keywords and grab a snippet of code that's associated to these keywords. And then when we generate the tests again, it's going to concatenate all those scriptlets into a fully functional, syntactically correct automation script. But as far as I'm concerned, as far as my scripter role, I'm done with that step. That's all I have to do. Like I said, I'll do a couple other examples here. So this is a little bit different type of keyword. Instead of a process, this is a step. And what I want to do here is click the login button. I know that's on the welcome page, so I'm just going to find the login link. And when I select this, again, it's going to bring up my keywords. My object is the login or log out link, and my default action is click. Like that's what you do most of the time with a link is click it. So we're just going to leave that as is. And I'll do just a couple more here. Here I want to enter librarian into my credentials field. I know that's on the login page. So again, I'm going to find the username text box and then input a value in here. And IQM Studio will remember what you've used in the past. And hopefully you can tell I've done this demo a couple of times. So I've used that value before. But again, that's it. I'm done. I just scripted that. So I want to flip to a different version of this diagram. But the only difference is I've gone ahead and scripted all the steps here. So all of these have the scripting already done, including going down the paths and the verifications. So with the verification in a table, generally you're going to need to give it a couple pieces of data to be able to identify the right row and right column and everything. So when we add this test book, we're going to verify test book in the name, Charles Dickens in the author, and murder and mystery in the genre. So that's that's it, and that's all just drop-down lists. Any non-technical person who knows something about the system can do that. But then the cool part is I'm going to switch over to our scripting view now. So this is the same information, same models that we were looking at. So here's those same 6 tests we generated. But now I can drill down into them on the automation side. So this first view is just the human readable version. So this is exactly what we saw in Spira. This is just to be able to, check to make sure that this test is right. We also have this narrative view, which is a little bit more detailed. Anytime you're dealing with automation, you need to give your automation tool more information than you do a human tester. So this has got a bit more detailed information. But I can also click over to this executable tab. And when I say that those keywords were grabbing scriptlets, this is what I mean here. So if I scroll down and find, so this is one of the keywords that I used, input librarian into the username field. This is that little scriptlet, this little piece of code that does that. So what I'm able to do now is I'm going to go back to this view and say generate the tests from here. And this is going to take just, less than 5 seconds, I think. This just generated 6 automation scripts and everything that needs to go along with them. So we're going to actually run these with Rapise here in a second. And Rapise needs a couple of things, a repository, an SS test file, and a JavaScript file. IQM Studio just did all of that for me. And again, it did it very, very quickly. So now what we can do is go get one of those tests and actually run it here. Let's see if I can find this quickly. Yep, so here's our 6 tests. And if we look at this timestamp, yep, so this is in real time here. We just created these. And now I can just double click on one of these. And Rapise is going to launch. Also, if I had Rapise open already, I could have just pointed to these files from within Rapise. Same thing. So this will take just a sec for Rapise to load. And while this is happening too, I'll say, so Adam mentioned earlier that we can associate these automation scripts to the tests in Rapise. Right now, these are just on my local machine, but if we wanted to, we could upload these automation scripts up to Spira, just like we did with the manual tests. So we have the capability to do both.
And while it's loading, just to mention that if you then save those files multiple times, back to the idea of change, because change is inevitable, what will happen is that the updates are all saved back into Spira, so that way you've got not just the saving of the test scripts and the test data, but you also have the versioning of those tests, test files, test scripts, and all the information in Spira. So it becomes a centralized version repository that can do the management and the versioning, but can do the scheduling too.
Yeah, exactly. Good point, Adam. So let's see.
Here it is.
I think that's the report. Here we go. So this is, we're just going to pick test 2 here now. And click play. And I'm hands off. So this is going to run the automation script. Launch Firefox, navigate to our URL, log in. Change some stuff, quick update, and I think we're done. So this should complete here in just a second, but that's a test we created in real time and whatever that was. I mean, our demo's only been going for 37 minutes. So this is the report that comes back after the test runs. You can see it's a very, very detailed report. And every step in this test failed except for the very last one. So now we can get with our automation engineer and or investigate ourselves. You know, was I looking for the wrong thing? Did I just put in, is there a typo here or what? But now I can do my root cause analysis. If it's a test update, like if I put in a typo, for example, I just go fix it on the scripting tab, rerun it, and it'll pass. I don't have to get an automation engineer involved. If it is something like this is saying it can't find the object, so that makes me think it's probably an XPath thing or something that I would need to get an automation engineer involved in, but all they would have to do is update the object. They don't need to know anything about the test. They can just say, okay, I updated the, maybe they had an error in their code snippet there. Then I can go back and rerun that test again. So it's this great separation of, the people who are very, very good at testing, they stay testers. The people who are good at developing, they manage the framework, and you don't have to cross the streams. If you'll excuse the Ghostbusters reference there.
Always good to have a Ghostbusters reference at any time.
Have to have a successful demo, right?
That's right.
So again, as Adam mentioned, we would make the update to this test, whether it's on the, the framework side, on the backend side, or updated the test. We would use star to sync everything. And Spira is going to keep track of all the changes that we made, that audit history that Adam mentioned. And this just eliminates so many manual steps from the process, integrating IQM Studio to Spira. So we really do see these two tools as more than the sum of their parts. Once you get fully integrated and up and running, yeah, this is just such an efficient process. So I think we covered everything I wanted to cover. Adam, do you have anything else?
Not especially. One thing to mention is that we're demonstrating a web test today, but these same principles will work for any kind of application that's supported by the automation tool, which will be web applications, mobile applications, desktop, green screen APIs. So again, we did look at web today as an example, but it's by no means limited to web. Any of the apps, ERP systems, Oracle Forms, SAP, Dynamics, you name it.
I'll say, there were some parts of this, I just sort of went from one node in the model to boom, here's an entire model. That was just for the sake of time. If anybody would like a more detailed demo of Studio or of, the integration to Spira, please reach out. I'm happy to, give you a more personalized demo.
So I think that's it for today, everyone. So thanks for attending the demonstration. Thanks, everyone, for presenting. And thanks, Audrey, for introducing.
And thanks for hosting, Adam and Audrey.